Hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's presentation. Please keep in mind that I'm going to keep everyone on mute, and if you have any questions, just add them to the chat and I'll attempt to answer them at the end. Today we're going to be discussing USB forensics with W4. So here's a little overview of some of the topics we'll go over today. If you're a forensic examiner, you are probably already familiar with some of the artifacts left behind on computers when doing examinations related to USB devices. Some common scenarios that would call for this kind of examination include fraud cases, IP theft, child exploitation, malware investigations, things like that. We're going to look at where we can find valuable artifacts related to USB usage, most of which we'll find in the registry. A lot of these artifacts can help you with identifying how a user may have used a USB device to commit some of these crimes. Then I'll do a demonstration where we will look at some of the different ways we can use W4 to help you in your examination by using the timelining and events view, doing some link analysis, and we'll also look at how we can output a report that will allow us to make the events of the case very clear to the stakeholders, which in some cases aren't the most technical people. So some common case scenarios. Let's start with IP theft. IP theft is becoming a huge problem these days. When we discuss IP theft, typically we're talking about employees stealing IP from their company. It's very easy for an employee to just plug in a flash drive to their PC, copy the files they want, and if the organization doesn't have any countermeasures set up to prevent that, there's pretty much nothing stopping them. Some motivations for IP theft include an employee who possibly wants to start their own competing business, or they want to take their customer information to their new job. They may feel like they own the information, or they had a part in creating it, or in a lot of cases, it's just your typical disgruntled employee. Some of the most commonly stolen files include customer contact information, software code, R&D information, financial records, things like that. It's important to identify exactly what kind of data you believe was stolen, as this will help you later on with search terms in your examination. Later in this presentation, I'll be doing an examination on an IP theft related case. Malware. So USB flash drives are a very easy way for an attacker to spread their malware. They can set up a USB device to automatically execute the malware either on their own or by setting up a USB drop attack. The average user is willing to plug in a flash drive that they find in a parking lot, and they'll just plug it into their PC and not think much of it. Attackers, they take advantage of this knowledge and will drop several USB devices outside of an organization that they want to attack, and just wait for the organization's own employees to execute the malware on their own machines. Some attackers will also put a file on the drive that, when it's open, will take them to a website, a phishing site, and they'll steal their information that way. A couple of interesting attack USBs include the Hack5 USB rubber ducky. This is a keystroke injection tool which, once connected to the host computer, will be accepted by the PC as a keyboard and accept the keystrokes previously set up by the attacker. We also have a USB killer, which I'm not sure if this is even considered malware because it's not really software. This is a device that looks just like any other USB flash drive, and it sends high voltage power surges when it's connected to a device, which can damage the hardware. Unfortunately, if your system was fried by this kind of attack, USB forensics won't be able to help much, as that computer is pretty much dead. Both of these devices look just like any other flash drive is kind of the important thing to note here. You wouldn't even know it if you saw one. So child exploitation cases. If you work in law enforcement, you know that a lot of child exploitation cases will typically start with a cyber tip that then leads to the execution of a search warrant of the suspect's home. We've had cases where we do a triage of a suspect's PC in the hopes of locating the evidence necessary to be able to arrest the suspect on site. This means we need to find pictures or videos. Being able to locate that evidence during the search warrant execution in a lot of cases is more likely to lead to a confession, in which case you basically have a slam dunk case. The thing is, you won't always easily find the contraband. Your suspect knows that a flash drive or micro SD card is easy to hide and is more likely to store the contraband there. So while conducting triage on a suspect's PC, if you have a hard time finding the contraband, you may want to divert your attention to USB devices that have been previously plugged in and some of those artifacts. You may find that the suspect is coming home every night, plugging a flash drive into the PC at the same time. You might also see some suspicious link files that sound like they're related to contraband. This may be something that you want to question the suspect about, since it's very likely that that flash drive is still in the house. He might admit that to those drives that he has hidden in a crawl space in the basement or something. You never know. In any case, the last thing you want to do is leave the scene without this information and without an arrest, therefore giving your suspect enough time to destroy all the evidence. So now I'm going to go over some of the artifacts. The first one is the SetUpAPIlog. This file contains information about device and driver installations. It's used by Windows for debug and troubleshooting purposes. Lucky for us, some of the devices logged in this file include USB devices. The file is located in the root/windows/inf folder. It's only found in Windows 7 and up. If you're investigating anything earlier, you will find similar information in the SetUpAPI.log file in the root/Windows folder for Windows 2000 to Windows XP. I have an example of an entry in the log for a 64 gigabyte Silicon Power flash drive. Here you can see the make and model information, serial number, device GUID, and install date. Be careful with the install date timestamp because it doesn't necessarily mean the first time that the device was connected. An example is when Windows or the user updates their driver. In that case, you're likely to have the date that the driver was updated or reinstalled, not the first time the driver was installed. So that's something to keep an eye out for. As I mentioned earlier, during triage, if you see an artifact like this is where you want to make sure officers are looking for this flash drive if they haven't already found it. And then they can use the make and model information to be able to identify it. Also note that the timestamps in this file are stored in local time, so you may have to do some conversion if you want to compare to, say, registry or file system artifacts, which are stored in UTC. So on to the registry. The majority of our USB artifacts will be located in the Windows registry. If you aren't familiar with the registry, this is basically a database that stores all kind of low-level settings for the Windows operating system. It has information about settings, options, and other values for programs and hardware installed on the PC. Of course, again, this includes USB devices. The registry is physically stored in several different files. Today, we're only going to be looking at those that are more likely to contain USB device artifact information. Two of these are the system and software registry files. These are located in the Windows/System32/config folder. Then we have the ntuser.dat file, which is located within each user's user folder. If you're ever in a rush and you're only interested in these USB registry artifacts, you can opt to only index these three files with W4 versus doing the entire drive. This ends up saving a lot of time and it's done a lot quicker. And as I mentioned before, these timestamps are stored in UTC. Locations of the registry file artifacts, they will vary a bit based on Windows operating system. For the most part, they're very similar. For today, I'm focused on Windows 10 since that's what most of your cases are going to be running, and that's what I'm running. So first, we're going to start with the system file. Note that some of these artifacts contain a lot of the same information, but there are some things that are unique to them. So you do want to check all of them. I'm going to just do a quick overview of them and show you the path so that you can reference later. So the USB and USB store keys. These are going to be able to get you the make, model, serial, and the last written time. Depending on the kind of examination you're doing, live machine versus dead box, you may have to look at what is the current control set. So if instead of current control set, you're seeing control set 1, control set 2, control set 3, etc., you'll have to determine what is the active control set. And you can do that by checking the select key, and you can determine if it's the which control set you should be focused on and which was the one that was active when the machine was running. And then you can basically just determine that you're not just looking at the backup. Then we have the mounted devices key. This will be able to also get you the make, model, serial, and the last drive letter used, and the volume GUID. This is really important because it will allow you to link this flash drive to recently used files. You're going to need that GUID and that drive letter. Software. Here we have the devices key. With the serial number you got from the other keys, you can cross-reference and identify the volume name in this case. And basically that's just going to give you that name that you see in Windows Explorer when you plug in your flash drive and it populates in that in Windows Explorer. Then we have the ntuser.dat file, which contains the mount points to key. With this, you can tell which user was logged in when that specific USB device was plugged into the machine. This will be different for every single user. So if you have multiple non-default users, you may want to verify that you check the ntuser file for every single user. So I have W4 open and I've processed a case for you guys, and now we're just going to do a quick demonstration on an IP related case. So I'm going to go to the search tab here, and in this case we've already done a quick investigation, and we've determined that a user, John Doe, had used a USB device to transfer files from his work machine to his to a competing business. So I'm going to go ahead, and this is his work machine that we're on right now. I'm going to go ahead and under show here, I'm going to change this from looking at all of the sources to just John Doe's user profile. And this will basically just filter out anything else that doesn't belong to John Doe. And it'll just make it easier to view everything. So since we already know that we're interested in USB devices and that we know that a USB device was used in this case, I'm going to select the USB devices artifact here. And that's going to populate with any time that a USB device was connected or disconnected to this computer. In this case, we can immediately see that a device was connected on March 4th at 10:18 p.m. and was disconnected shortly after that within a 2-minute period, and then connected again on March 5th at 3:18 p.m. So if we select this first artifact, this will give us some information over here under our Properties tab about this specific flash drive. The first part here, we know that it's linked to the user John Doe, the device, which is this desktop. And under here we have some information related to timestamps, and you have connect dates, created, and disconnect dates. In this case, these timestamps, it's basically what W4 is using to create this timeline here for you. Then you'll have some information about that specific device. So you have your last drive letter used, your serial number, some of the vendor information here, and the volume GUID and the volume name. So you can take that serial number, and this is where you have some organizations that have policies against users using their personal USB devices. You can come in here and just by looking at this information, you can pretty much determine if this was something that was authorized to be used by the company or not. In this case, we've determined that it's not, based on the device information, because this company doesn't give away silicon power 64 gigabyte flash drives to their employees. Below that, we're going to see all of the sources from where all of the above artifacts were extracted from. So these are basically all the sources that we just discussed earlier. If you want to go look into these files and look through them manually and kind of compare what you're seeing, you're able to do that. Everything's listed right here. So in this case, I think the most important thing that we're going to be interested in is probably this connected and disconnect times. So this 2-minute period I think is very important. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tag them by right-clicking and selecting Add or Edit Event Tags. And I'm going to call this tag Incident. I'm going to add it to our existing tags list. I'm going to select this a bright red and press OK. So now these 2 items are tagged for us. I'm also going to add a note that this is the first time this device was connected. And that'll just put a note here. And things like these tags and the notes, they're going to be able to basically just make it a lot easier for you to identify certain things when you come back and you have a lot of artifacts on the screen. This makes it easier to find things. And not just that, once you export this to a report, it'll make it easier for your stakeholders to kind of see what's happened. It's with the notes, a lot of these terms, it's not very easy to tell what's going on. So that's why we want to add some notes and kind of explain in layman's terms what's happening with some of these artifacts. So as I mentioned, this was connected on March 4th at 10:18. So I want to go down here and set a limit for this time so that when we look at our artifacts, we're only looking at the things that happened between the time that the USB device was connected and disconnected, just that 2-minute period. This is the date, and I'm going to enter March 4th. Same for our end date. I'm going to set this to 10:21 p.m. for the end date. Okay. And then I want to set the start time to 10:18 p.m. And that's basically just going to give us these 2 artifacts, and you know, it's like a 3-minute period that we want to be looking at. Everything's tagged, and we got a note here. So if we go up, and we can go up here and just select all supported items, that'll give you basically all of the artifacts from anything that happened within that 2-minute period. We have a lot of stuff going on, so I think I want to limit this a bit more. So I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to select the USB devices again. And we have this other USB device activity artifact here. And you can press the this down arrow. And if you had multiple USB devices here, you can choose to view the artifacts for those specific USB devices by holding down the control key and selecting just that USB device. In this case, we just have the one, which is our Silicon Power 64 gigabyte flash drive. So when you select that, it's going to populate all of the activity for that specific device. And we can immediately see, you know, the first thing here, target folder created, target, that's our drive letter E that we were able to see earlier. And a folder was created named Documents for Jane. Jane, in this case, is the the competitor that John had sent this this very valuable information to. So if we click on that, we can tell that this is coming from the Windows jump list. If you're not familiar with the jump list, that's basically just when you have a tool, let's say in this case it's an Excel sheet, you can see under all these recent files, this is where all of that information is going to be stored in your jump list within a folder that looks like this. By going down, that's basically where all of this stuff is. So in this case, it's the current customer list was created under the Documents for Jane folder. So this is obviously really important information. We want to go ahead and select all of those files. I'm going to right-click and add them to our incident tag and press OK. So already we have a pretty good story going here. Anyone can kind of look at this and pretty much determine what's happening. We already know that this device is linked to our user, John Doe, based on some of the artifacts that we discussed earlier within the ntuser.dat file. But we kind of want to add a little bit more to this. So I'm going to go up here and add our sessions artifact, which is going to have any time that a user logs in or logs off. In this case, we've already filtered for John Doe, so we only have records for John Doe here. It looks like there are 36. I'm going to select that. And if you notice, you won't actually see any log on and log off records in this case, because we have a date limit set here. So we might want to open that up a little bit more. I'm already familiar with this case, so I have a pretty good idea of all the times that he logged on or logged off. So I'm going to set this to start at 10:10 p.m. and 11:21 p.m. So here we have the first time he logged on right before he had connected that USB device, and then the time he logged off. So he logged in at 10:13 p.m., which is just a few minutes before the device was connected. And shortly after that, he moved around some files, and then he disconnected the Silicon Power 64 gigabyte USB device, and then he logs off shortly after that. So this is obviously pretty important. I'm going to go ahead and tag these files and add them to our incident tag. So now we can go down and select just our incident tag, and we have our entire, the story that we've built for the person who's going to be reading our report, our stakeholder, and it's very easy to understand what's happened here. At this point, you can choose to add more comments, make everything a little bit more clear, or add any other artifacts that you think may have had something to do with the case. In this case, I think we're all set to go. The last thing I want to do is I want to create a link graph. And you can do that by just selecting this button right here. And that's going to create a link graph that shows all of the different artifacts that are connected to this specific device. So you can see John Doe here. It's connected to him. It's the user account. You have all of the different customer list Excel sheets that he had moved onto the device. You have things like the volume name, the serial number, which is really important. You can clean this view up a bit I think that, let's say in this case, you think the serial number does a good enough job of identifying the item. You can choose to remove things like the GUID. So basically, you would just select it and go to Remove Node, and it will just get rid of it. And you can just use this to clean up the view a little bit, because this is just basically a visual that you can show a stakeholder who may not be very technical, and they'll look at this and immediately understand that, oh, these different artifacts are linked to this specific item. You also have an option to hide these edge labels, and that just cleans things up a little bit. If you'd like to export this view, you have two options. You can choose to just export it. This is the fast way. Here you'll just export to PNG or export to PDF, and then immediately you'd be able to open that. In this case, I want to take this view and I want to just save it for my report. So I'm just going to write in here USB device links, and you can choose to add a description if you'd like, and then down here it just shows you a little preview of it, and that's how it's going to appear in the report. I'm going to go ahead and save that. If you have multiple of these link graphs that you want to save, this is where you would go in to manage them. You would just click on it and you can edit the information again. You can delete them if you decided to add different things to it or take things off of it. And so now that we have that saved and we have our timeline ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and just make a report for this. And we're going to go down here, press this button where it says Create Report. So under the first step, under the general information here, this is just information that you're going to be able to use to identify the report later on this list. This information under general doesn't actually go inside the report. In this case, I'm just going to name it John Doe report. The report name will also be used as the file name in this case. Report title, I'm just going to say Silicon Power USB device examination. You can edit the logos here. In this case, I'm just going to keep the default Vound logo and W4 logo. You have some custom fields here that will show up in that page that front page in the report. You have the case name, the day it was created, and you can add your own custom ones here if you want to add anything else. Then you have some header and footer options, decide whether you want a table of contents, and if you want to add a summary section. I'm going to keep all of these there so I can show you what they look like. And here I'm just going to add, this is where you add your sections. These are basically the meat and potatoes of your report. And when you add a section, you're basically just going to select the different artifacts that you have available to you. In this case, I've already tagged everything that's important to me, and this is all I want to show in my report. I want to keep it really simple. So my incident tag, you basically just click the down arrow and you're going to be able to see all your tags. In this case, we just have the incident. I'm going to choose that and press OK. You have several more options here to how you want to display that report to your user. Under Display As, I want to just display this as events timeline because that's basically what we've been looking at. And like I mentioned earlier, the timeline is very important to an IP theft investigation. You want to see these things in chronological order so that whoever's reading this will understand exactly how things happened. So I'm going to select that. This is basically a default. It defaults everything here for you, so you don't have to worry about that. The title is, in this case, it's just the name of the tag. You can choose to change that. You can add a description here if you want to add more information about the case or those specific artifacts. I'll keep that blank for now. And under section options, we can configure the options that you want to apply to all of the sections. If you include the tags in the events timeline section, this is just going to show the tag next to all of those artifacts. This is probably more important if you have a few different types of tags. I only have the incident tag in my case, so it's not as important, but I'm going to throw it in there just so that it you guys can tell, you can see what it looks like basically. And then I'm going to also include the notes in the events timeline sections because those notes can become really important. We want our user to be able to see those. So next we have the link graphs where we can add that picture of the link graph that we took. And in this case, I just have the one USB device links. I'm going to press OK, and it'll add that at the end. And then you have two different types of output formats. You can export this as a PDF, and that's basically just going to be a regular PDF file. You won't be able to edit it or make many changes. Or you can export it to Microsoft Word, and that's literally just a Microsoft Word document. You can go in there and you can make any changes like you would with any document, and you can just add anything you want in line. So that's really useful if there are certain things that this report isn't allowing you to add. You can just add them manually later on. I don't want to make any changes to this report, so I'm just going to choose to export it as PDF. So I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to produce the report. And I'll just save that to my desktop. And I'll be able to open that up and show you guys what that looks like. Okay. So here's our report. The first page is basically just a title page, and we have that information that you can add as we discussed. Then you have a table of contents. You can go in here and basically these are clickable right here. So if you have a lot of different artifacts that were added, you can just click on exactly what you want to see, and it will take you directly to that page. So the summary page is the next one, so I'll just click on that. This summary page is just going to have information about your sources. In some cases, you may choose to add a lot of different sources, a lot of different, so if you have like 10 USB devices that you examine, they would all show up here with some information on them. You can add further descriptions and more information to this within your case file in W4. And then you have the types of artifacts that are within the case. And then we have our timeline view, which shows exactly what we were seeing in the events view within W4. So as you can see, our tags are there. The little note that I made earlier was there. So we have that story that we've created to show our stakeholders. If you go down a bit more, you'll have the last page, which contains our link graph, and which just does a really good way of showing that visual. A visual of the happenings to our users or to whoever's reading the report. So that's all I have for the demonstration. Let's go ahead and open up our slide. So some considerations that I want everyone to keep in mind. I know I've discussed a bit about triage during the presentation. This is a very important process and should always be done if you have the option and the legal authority. As of the next W4 release, live triage will be supported by W4. So if it's something that you've been interested in, keep an eye out for that. It will include live triage, RAM capture. You'll be able to do a portable install on a USB drive and a whole lot more. We'll also be doing a webinar on the new feature very soon. Also, I know I focused a lot on flash drives for this presentation, but this information generally applies to a lot of different devices, including web cameras, mobile devices, credit card skimmers, etc., and all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty much all I got. If anyone has any questions, I'm looking at the chat and I'm not seeing anything just yet. So thank you everyone for joining today's presentation. If you haven't done so already, please look for our next webinar on our website and register for those. If you have any thoughts, comments, or questions that come up after you let this marinate a little, please let us know, and have a good day, and thank you very much.